In the vast expanse of the American prairie, where honor and family bonds run deeper than the oldest wells, a cowboy's world is about to crumble. What happens when the brother you've trusted your entire life has been living the greatest lie imaginable? Today's story will take you on a journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and the painful truth that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most. Prepare yourself for a tale that will challenge everything you believe about family loyalty. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Hartwell Ranch as Jake tightened the cinch on his saddle. At 32, he was a man carved by the prairie wind and hardened by years of honest labor. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for another day of herding cattle across the endless grasslands that had been his family's domain for 3 generations. The ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, a testament to the Hartwell legacy that his grandfather had built from nothing but determination and sweat. Jake's younger brother, Daniel, emerged from the main house, his polished boots clicking against the wooden porch. At 28, Daniel had always been different from Jake, smoother, more articulate, and somehow blessed with their father's business acumen. While Jake spent his days in the saddle, Daniel handled the ranch's finances, negotiations, and dealings with the bank. Their father had died 5 years ago, leaving the ranch to both sons equally, but it was understood that Jake would manage the land while Daniel would handle the money. "Another beautiful morning," Daniel called out, his smile as bright as the prairie sunrise. "The cattle buyers from Kansas City should be here next week." "I've got everything arranged," Jake nodded, trusting his brother completely. Daniel had always been the smart one, the one who could navigate the complex world of contracts and negotiations that made Jake's head spin. Their partnership had worked flawlessly for years. Jake's expertise with the land and livestock, combined with Daniel's financial acumen, had kept the Hartwell Ranch prosperous even during tough times. As Jake mounted his horse, Thunder, he felt the familiar sense of pride that came with continuing his family's tradition. The ranch wasn't just their livelihood. It was their heritage, their identity, and their promise to future generations. Every decision they made was guided by the responsibility they felt toward preserving what their grandfather and father had built. Jake rode out toward the northern pasture, unaware that this would be the last morning he would feel such uncomplicated pride in the Hartwell name. 3 days later, Jake was repairing a broken fence line when he noticed a black sedan making its way up the dusty road to their ranch house. Visitors were rare, especially those driving city cars instead of the pickup trucks common in their area. From his position on the hillside, Jake watched as 2 men in dark suits stepped out of the vehicle and approached Daniel, who had emerged from the house to greet them. The conversation appeared tense. Jake could see Daniel's usually confident posture become defensive, his hands gesturing more frantically than usual. One of the men handed Daniel a manila envelope, and Jake watched his brother's face drain of color as he read whatever was inside. The men stayed for nearly an hour, their voices occasionally rising loud enough for Jake to catch fragments carried by the wind. Words like foreclosure, default, and immediate payment. When the men finally left, Daniel remained standing on the porch, staring at the envelope in his hands. Jake finished his work and rode back to the house, concerned by what he had witnessed. "Who were those men?" he asked as he approached the porch, but Daniel quickly folded the papers and forced his usual smile. "Just some insurance adjusters," Daniel replied, but his voice lacked its typical confidence. "Nothing to worry about. You know how these city folks are. They make everything sound more dramatic than it is." Jake studied his brother's face, noting the slight tremor in his hands and the way he avoided direct eye contact. Something was wrong, but Daniel had always handled the business side of things, and Jake had learned to trust his brother's judgment. That evening, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had changed. The easy camaraderie between the brothers felt strained, and Daniel seemed distracted during dinner, pushing food around his plate without eating. When Jake asked about the upcoming cattle sale, Daniel's responses were vague and evasive. For the first time in their partnership, Jake began to wonder if his implicit trust in his brother had been misplaced. Later that night, Jake lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the prairie, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass, and the creaking of the old house settling. But beneath these comforting sounds, he could hear Daniel pacing in his room, the floorboards groaning under his restless steps. Something was definitely wrong, and Jake's instincts, honed by years of watching over livestock and reading the signs of approaching storms, told him that whatever was troubling Daniel would soon affect them all. Unable to sleep, Jake rose before dawn and decided to check on the books himself, something he rarely did, trusting Daniel's reports completely. He made his way to the ranch office, a small room off the main house where Daniel kept all their financial records. The door was usually left open, but Jake found it locked. Using the spare key hidden under a loose board, he entered the dimly lit office. What Jake discovered made his blood run cold. The filing cabinets that should have contained years of financial records were nearly empty. Bank statements, loan documents, and correspondence that Daniel always assured him were filed safely were simply not there. In the remaining files, Jake found bank statements showing a series of large withdrawals over the past 2 years, each one significant enough to fund a small ranch. But it was the discovery of a second set of books that truly shattered Jake's world. Hidden in a locked drawer whose key Jake found taped under Daniel's desk were the real financial records. The ranch hadn't been prosperous at all. It had been bleeding money for years. Worse yet, Daniel had taken out multiple mortgages against the property without Jake's knowledge, using forged signatures and fraudulent documents. The manila envelope from the previous day lay open on the desk. Inside were foreclosure notices and legal documents demanding immediate payment of over $800,000 in overdue loans. The ranch that had been in their family for 3 generations, the land that their grandfather had died defending and their father had spent his life improving, was going to be auctioned off in 30 days. Jake's hand shook as he read document after document, each one revealing another layer of Daniel's deception. The cattle sales that Daniel had arranged weren't bringing in profit. They were desperate, attempts to pay interest on mounting debts. The business trips to the city weren't negotiations with buyers. They were meetings with loan sharks and predatory lenders who had been circling the failing ranch like vultures. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the office window, Jake heard Daniel's footsteps approaching. He quickly gathered the most damning documents and stuffed them inside his jacket, then pretended to be looking for a simple receipt. When Daniel entered the office, his face went white upon seeing Jake there. "Looking for something?" Daniel asked, his voice strained with barely concealed panic. Jake studied his brother's face, the face he had trusted implicitly for his entire life, and saw a stranger. The easy smile was replaced by the desperate expression of a cornered animal, and Jake realized that the brother he thought he knew had perhaps never existed at all. The confrontation that followed would forever change both brothers' lives. Jake pulled out the documents he had found and spread them across Daniel's desk like evidence in a courtroom. "How long?" was all Jake could manage to say, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of betrayal was crushing, making it difficult to breathe, let alone speak. Daniel's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. His shoulders sagged as if an enormous burden was finally visible to the world. 3 years, he admitted, slumping into his chair. Maybe longer. I kept thinking I could fix it, that I could find a way to make it all work out before you ever had to know. The confession came in broken pieces, like a dam failing under too much pressure. The story that emerged was one of good intentions corrupted by desperation and pride. Daniel had initially taken a small loan to invest in what he believed was a sure thing, a cattle futures deal that promised enormous returns. When that investment failed catastrophically, he had borrowed more money to cover the loss. convinced that the next deal would save them. Each failure led to more borrowing, each lie requiring a bigger lie to cover it up. "I thought I was protecting you," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "You love this land so much. You work so hard every day. I couldn't bear to tell you that I was the reason we were losing it all." Jake listened in stunned silence as Daniel described years of increasingly desperate schemes, forged documents, falsified bank records, even selling cattle that didn't belong to them and using the money to pay interest on loans. The worst revelation came when Daniel admitted that some of the money had gone to fund his gambling addiction, a secret he had hidden even from himself for years. The polished boots, the confident demeanor, the business trips to the city. It had all been an elaborate performance designed to hide the fact that Daniel was systematically destroying their family legacy one bet at a time. Jake felt as if the ground beneath his feet was shifting, like the earth during a quake. Everything he had believed about his life, his family, and his future had been built on Daniel's lies. The brother he had looked up to, trusted completely, and worked alongside for years was not the man Jake thought he was. Worse yet, Jake realized that his own willful ignorance, his decision to let Daniel handle all the finances while he focused on the work he loved, had enabled this catastrophe. As Daniel continued his confession, tears streaming down his face, Jake struggled with emotions he had never experienced before. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound, but underneath the anger and hurt was something even more painful: the recognition that the brother he was grieving for had perhaps never truly existed at all. The auction notice arrived exactly as the documents had predicted, posted prominently on their front gate like a scarlet letter announcing their shame to the entire community. Jake stood in the morning light, reading the legal language that would strip them of everything their family had built. In 30 days, strangers would bid on the Hartwell Ranch, reducing 3 generations of dreams and hard work to mere dollars and cents. Daniel had disappeared 3 days after their confrontation, leaving behind only a note that said he was going to fix this somehow. Jake had searched everywhere: the local bars where Daniel sometimes gambled, the hotels in nearby towns, even the train station. But his brother had vanished as completely as if the prairie had swallowed him whole. Jake was alone with the weight of destruction that Daniel had left behind. The hardest part was facing their neighbors and the community that had known the Hartwell family for decades. Word traveled fast in ranch country, and soon everyone knew about the impending foreclosure. Some offered sympathy, others offered to buy specific pieces of equipment or livestock, but Jake could see the judgment in their eyes. How could he not have known? How could he have been so blind to what was happening under his own roof? Sarah Chun, whose family owned the adjacent ranch, came by on the 15th day with a proposal that broke Jake's heart, even as it offered hope. "My family wants to buy the ranch," she said simply, standing in the same kitchen where Jake had shared thousands of meals with Daniel. "We'll pay fair market value, and you can stay on as foreman if you want. It won't be yours anymore, but at least it won't be broken up and sold to developers." Jake appreciated the offer. Sarah's family were good people who would care for the land, but accepting would mean admitting defeat. It would mean acknowledging that Daniel's betrayal had not only destroyed their family legacy, but had also rendered Jake incapable of fighting for what remained. The proud cowboy, who had never backed down from a challenge, found himself considering surrender for the first time in his life. As the auction date approached, Jake made one last desperate attempt to save the ranch. He gathered every asset he could find: his truck, his horses, even his grandfather's antique saddle, and drove to the bank in the county seat. The loan officer, a young woman who had clearly never set foot on a ranch, looked at his pathetic collection of belongings with barely concealed pity. "Mr. Hartwell," she said gently, "even if we accepted all of this as collateral, it wouldn't cover even 10% of what you owe. The ranch has been mortgaged beyond its value. There's simply no way to make the numbers work." Jake left the bank knowing that his fight was over, but the cowboy in him refused to simply wait for the inevitable. If he was going to lose everything, he would at least face it with dignity. The day of the auction dawned clear and cold, with a wind that seemed to carry the whispers of 3 generations of Hartwell men who had worked this land. Jake dressed in his best clothes, the same suit he had worn to his father's funeral, and walked out to meet his fate with his head held high. The auctioneer had set up a podium near the main house, and dozens of people had gathered, some out of genuine interest in bidding, others simply curious to witness the end of the Hartwell legacy. As the bidding began, Jake watched strangers assign monetary values to everything that had defined his life. The cattle brought good prices, the equipment sold quickly, and even the old barn that his grandfather had built with his own hands was knocked down to a salvage company. But the cruelest moment came when Sarah Chun stepped forward to bid on the land itself. Her family's offer the only thing standing between the ranch and complete destruction by developers. Just as the auctioneer was about to accept Sarah's final bid, a commotion arose from the crowd. Daniel emerged from a dusty pickup truck, his appearance shocking even to Jake. His brother had lost weight. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, and his face showed the toll of whatever desperate journey he had been on. But in his hand, Daniel carried a cashier's check. "Stop the auction," Daniel called out, his voice hoarse but determined. "I have the money," the crowd murmured in surprise as Daniel approached the podium, the check trembling in his outstretched hand. Jake couldn't process what he was seeing. Where could Daniel have possibly gotten enough money to save the ranch? The answer, when it came, was both redemptive and tragic. Daniel had spent the weeks since his confession tracking down every person he had ever borrowed money from, every debt he had incurred, every lie he had told. In a final, desperate act of honesty, he had gone to their uncle, Robert, their father's brother who lived in Colorado and whom they hadn't spoken to in years following a family dispute. "I told him everything," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. "Every lie, every debt, every mistake I made. Uncle Robert paid off all the loans, but there's a condition. The condition was that Daniel would leave the ranch forever, signing over his half of the inheritance to Jake and agreeing never to return to their family land. It was a punishment that fit the crime. Daniel had broken their family's trust, and now he would be forever exiled from the family's legacy." As the crowd dispersed and the auction equipment was packed away, the 2 brothers stood alone on the land their grandfather had claimed from the wilderness. Jake felt no joy in their salvation, only a profound sadness for everything that had been lost. The ranch was saved, but their relationship, their trust, and their shared future had been destroyed just as completely as if the land had been sold to strangers. Daniel climbed back into his pickup truck without another word, driving away down the same dusty road where they had once raced their horses as children. Jake watched until the truck disappeared beyond the horizon, knowing that while he had kept the land, he had lost the brother who had once made it feel like home. The prairie wind continued to blow as it always had, indifferent to human pain and loss, carrying with it the bitter lesson that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those we love most.